Hello, everyone, and thank you very much for coming on this Friday and joining us for this online workshop. It is a great pleasure to have you also here, and especially to have Nikolina and her amazing colleagues from the S3 Summer School from Croatia. You'll find out about an amazing project that I also was quite lucky to be part of. And you'll understand what they are doing and how it's a learning experience on both sides, not only for the high school students, but also for us scientists. And so the topic of today is learning by doing, how to show teens that science is cool. And before giving the floor to Nikolina, who is going to introduce the project, I want to actually introduce each of the scientists that will be speaking to you today. Nikolina is a bioinformatician at Sankin Amsterdam, working on post-transcriptional regulation in T cells. She previously obtained her doctoral degree in bioscience engineering from Katholieke Universiteit in Leuven, Belgium. Among other science popularization activities, Nikolina has been working as a volunteer at the Summer School of Science for the past 9 years and has taken the roles of organizer, project leader, and workshop leader. Hello, Nikolina.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Great. Let's go to Alexander. He has a PhD in neurosciences and is a lead researcher data scientist at Lixon. He will discuss how to turn expensive research projects into $50 projects for high school students. Hi, Alexander. Thank you for joining.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me.
We have Dunia with us as well, a bioinformatics scientist at Illumina UK, looking how to better diagnose cancer patients using sequencing data. She previously obtained her PhD from Imperial College London in the same field. Dunia was the first participant at the Summer School of Science some 15 years ago and has remained active ever since by organizing camp and leading several projects. Hi, Dunia. Thank you for coming.
Hiya. Nice to be here.
We then have with us as well as Snezhana, a graduate student at Utrecht University, studying the role of abscission, the final step of cytokinesis in cell-fate decisions. First, she has been a part of Summer School of Science as a participant, but later also in the roles of project leader and workshop leader. Hi, Snezhana. Thank you for joining. And we also have with us Mario, who is a fifth-year student of the Faculty of Medicine, University of Zagreb. He is active in neuroscience research as popularization of the field and also has been part of the Summer School of Science since 2015 in the roles of participant, workshop leader, technical assistant, and organizer. Hi, Mario. Thank you for coming.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Well, I can speak continuously about the project, but I want rather to let each of you to speak and to share your experience. And I know that we will start with Nikolina with your presentation. I'll stop sharing my screen for now.
So hello once again, everyone. Thank you for joining this webinar. So as Nicoletta kindly introduced us, we're going to talk about a science project we've been doing in Croatia for, well, now it's already 20 years. And it's about showing teens that science is basically cool and kind of encouraging them to really, be brave enough to step into this scientific careers. So to kind of give you a bit of a background, and like the reason why we're doing this. So the way that we would ideally have science taught in school is in this way. So we would like, ideally, if there were enough financial resources and enough motivated teachers, the kids would be learning science not only through books, but also through doing things with their hands, through doing experiments. However, in reality, at least what we've noticed in Croatia and the neighboring countries, oftentimes the science teaching looks more like this in schools. So kids sometimes, even if they're interested in science, don't really know if that's something that would work for them. So they have never had a chance to experience what the science feels like. So this was kind of the guiding idea for starting this project 20 years ago. So this is what the Summer School of Science looks like. So we have kids really doing practical stuff. So they really experience what it's like to be a scientist. So to start with some of the basic information, so the program that we're running is called Summer School of Science, and it's split in two camps. So we have the S3 camps for students in grades 9 and 10, which translates to approximately age 15, 16 teenagers, and S3++, which is for a bit older ones, so age 17, 18, just before they go to university. And so far, the school has, first things first, so each camp takes 10 days. So in these 10 days, you really like have a scientific project, and they can do, so they can work on something sciencey. So far we had hundreds of students that attended our camp from all over the world. The camp itself is, as already mentioned, located in Croatia, in a tiny city of Požega, at the east of the country. The official language of the school is English, so we also test if the students are proficient enough in English by running interviews with them in the selection process. And the entire camp is located at the local high school. So why this is like this and why this is important is going to become clear in a minute. So a bit of the behind the scenes. The entire summer school is run by a non-government organization called Society for Out-of-Frame Education, which is basically a group of volunteers that are passionate about science education. For financing ourselves and for running the school, we really depend heavily on sponsors and donations. So I listed here a few of the bigger sponsors we had in the past few years. And we also rely on donations for the equipment. So each year we have a different set of projects, and it's not feasible for us to really buy everything each year. So oftentimes the research institutes are willing to donate the equipment for us, but also companies such as Oxford Nanopores or Emotive did in the past years. As I mentioned, everything we do is completely volunteering based. And we also try to keep the participation fee for the students at a minimum, especially compared to similar projects that exist in other European countries such as UK. For us, our aim is really to make it as easy as possible for all the kids that like science to really join us, and not the finances be like something that prevents them from coming. So now to give you a bit more clear idea of how one camp would look like. So at one camp in these 10 days, we would usually have 6 different projects from different disciplines. So for instance, going from molecular biology to neuroscience and physics. Each project would be run by one student, who is either at a master, PhD, or postdoc level. It can also be a pair of students. So I guess it would be people like you in the audience. And then they're joined by usually 3 to 4 secondary school students. And this, like keeping this size of the groups really small, really allows us to have an individual approach towards each kid and towards like their learning rate, because not everyone learns at the same rate. So alongside all of these people, we also have 2 organizers and usually 1 technical assistant per camp, which are running everything behind the scenes. So when it comes to the project itself, the project with this 10 days version of a scientific project is really what the projects look like. So you would start as a project leader, you would start by introducing the background. So everything that the students need to know to be able to move on with the project. They would then pose a hypothesis, and they would run either experiments or write some code depending on the field. They would then do data analysis, and finally data results interpretation. In addition, we also have the students present their work like they're in a mini conference, so they can also be challenged by questions from the audience. And we have them write a scientific paper about everything they've done. So it's really like you're being a scientist for 10 days. So if you're on the other side, so if you're the person who is planning a project for the students, there are a few things to kind of keep in mind. So first, the project should have to be feasible. So you have to adjust the level to the level of the students, but also in terms of equipment, and also, as also Alex will mention a bit later. So the conditions in which we're working are not, you're not at EMBL, you don't have all the equipment you can imagine. So you have to think of terms of what is feasible to do on spot in a sort of improvised conditions. Then we noticed through experience that the students don't really like when the projects are made out of series of not really well-connected experiments. So what they really prefer is to have something more like a small PhD or whatever, however you would call it. So to have this major goal that they're aiming to, so that everything they do kind of leads to this one big goal and like this one big question they need to answer. Then you should always also think of the backups. So sometimes the students will learn quicker than you would expect them to. So you need to have backup material to be able to give it to something new for them to work on, so they're not feeling bored, or the other way around. So you should also prepare for the opposite situation. And it also comes, and there's also this also comes to the question of the equipment. So if you're running an experiment that has 10 different steps, and like step number 3 is DNA isolation, then you don't really want to depend on that one single experiment failing or succeeding. So ideally, you would also bring with yourself the already isolated sample. So even if it fails on spot, you can still continue with steps 4 to 10. And it's also basically adjustability. So you should be able to think of different kind of scenarios and how to adjust your project so that in the end, you still reach the goal, independent of these hiccups that can happen along the way. So how does a single day at the camp look like? So we have 3 meals, but everything in between is basically dedicated to science. So it's 8 hours working day for students. In the evening, we usually have invited lectures, which are the scientists from different European institutions. And so far, we have also been quite happy to host 2 Nobel Prize laureates. And this is really something unique for the kids. Like for us, it's quite usual to go to a lecture and hear a scientist talk. But when you're 15 or 16, these people are your idols. So having this opportunity to listen to them and to hear about the cutting edge science and to engage in discussions with them, that's really something special for the students. After that, we also have some time for fun. So usually we organize things like pub quiz or melting pot or treasure hunt. Usually Mario organizes for us. And finally, when the day is over for the students, it's still not over for us. So the project leaders and the organizers meet at the end of each day and discuss everything that happened in each project and how, if there are some hiccups or someone has issues, we discussed how to best solve them. So you're not left alone if you're encountering some problems. And now to give you a bit of a taste of what the projects in the past have looked like, I'm just going to very quickly go through several of them, basically to give you an idea. So starting from one from the molecular biology field. So a few years ago, Cedric and Ming were working on this interaction of bacteria and phages. And maybe for non-biologists, the phages are basically the viruses that attack specifically bacteria, but not humans, for instance. So it's also something that could be quite useful in therapy when antibiotics fail to do their job. So what they did with the kids is first they went around the city and they collected the water samples, so the samples from the environment. Then they grew bacteria and also phages from those samples. They identified the bacterial species they found. They did DNA isolation from them. And they also then performed nanopore sequencing and bioinformatic analysis of those sequences. So an example from chemistry. So the same year, Snehat and Sinduja were working on the leaves and the chemistry and biology that stands behind the color of leaves. So as you can imagine, the first step was collecting leaves from the environment. Then they looked at them under the microscope. They extracted the pigments using the thin layer chromatography and separated them. They looked at the absorption spectra of different pigments, and they also went more towards the biology with looking at the 3D structures of protein that are bound to pigments. And they also did isolate these complexes and run the native electrophoresis. Now moving to something completely different, it's also a bit more outside of my comfort zone, is the computer science. So in 2017, we had Vladimir run a project called Who's Winning It, forecasting sports tournaments. So basically what the kids did with the help of machine learning is to simulate how a European football championship could play out. So they started with learning how the ELO ranking works. So I think that's basically all these like numerical things you can get from the past games. So for instance, how long one player can run or how many goals he can score, these kind of things. Oops. Then they're in the simulation with that, and they finally built a model to predict the goals and how this entire tournament can play out when you match specific countries using the rules from the Euro 6 2016. And they also very nicely put everything they did on GitHub, so you can still find it there today. Then an engineering project. So Elia in 2019 built a self-driving car with the students. So basically they started from scratch. They built the entire car, putting the camera, all the hardware pieces together. And then they also introduced the software. So the artificial intelligence component, so that the car, when it's driving, it can really see where the road is and navigate itself. And it was really super cool when it worked at the end of the camp. Just a few more examples, again, to give you an idea of the different things. So Nicoletta here, she did one project, I think in 2019, on animal testing and what the alternatives to animal testing can be. So using more in silico and computational methods. We had kids one year build a helicopter, also look for the planets outside of the solar system and whether they may be habitable, and also build a listening device, so a bit of a spy equipment. So if this sounds cool to you, and if you know a high school student that's of the right age and would be interested in something like this, we are just now having the applications open for another week and a half. So please do share the word and tell them about this project and make them apply. And this is my last slide. So a few impressions of the students that participated in the camp in the past. And as I'm leaving you with these impressions, I'm slowly also giving the floor to Alex.
So hello everyone, thank you Nina for the good frame where I can now start talking without introducing all the summer school. I was saying that the goal of this presentation is to prepare to show you the different challenges that you may face when you prepare a scientific project for a summer school. So basically, how do you mentally prepare your project? And then once you're live with the kid on the summer camp, how do you handle them and succeed in your project? So the theory is quite simple actually. So you started as a super motivated PhD or master student or postdoc in your case. You apply to the summer school, so you contact Nina saying, I'm super motivated to do the summer school, let's go, I love teaching. I think we'll make a great team, let's go. And hopefully your project and the subject you're working on can be done with a few euros at best, because as mentioned Nina, we want to be very inclusive on the financial situation of all students, so we don't have tons of money to run the projects. And then you just go there, you're super friendly with all the students, you love it, they love it, and you have one of the greatest time of your life. That's the theory. Unfortunately, in practice, it's never going this way. Even after several years of doing the summer school, every year is very different and every project is very different. So you still start as a motivated student, and at the end, it's still the greatest time of your life. But the path is a bit more complicated, where basically you ask yourself, oh, is my project good enough for the student? Is it too complicated? Is it too expensive? Would they like it? Is there enough experiments? You're not sure. So just before I start into more general points about what are the different challenges you may face, I wanted to tell a bit about the 3 projects I've been working with the kids, with the teenagers. My first project was 3 different questions, which was not really linked, I would say. It was not a story like Nina told before. The idea was to work with bees to make them learn some behavior, like the Pavlov reflex, but with others instead of cookies and bell. With other and sugar, you can learn the bee to put out his tongue. And the goal was to know if a bee can recognize an odor or not. So that was one project with bees. The second question we asked during the same summer school was to know if bees can count. And basically we built a maze where there was different visual cues to know if the bees could see that when there is like 3 objects, there is sugar. When there is like only 2, there is no sugar, and find their way through the maze like this. And finally, we build a test, a psychological test to know like if there is a way one psychological test cannot lie. That was a fun little experiment to finish the summer school. The second year, I came way more prepared, if I may say, in the sense that I had the whole story, like the whole package. From doing the experiment as a neuroscientist, we were doing the experiment, so it was the Pavlov experiment in bee. Then extracting the results, analyzing the results, creating a model, a neural network model to represent how the bee learn, and then like fit the model on our data. It was like the perfect circle, the thing you want to publish when you're a PhD. And it worked super, super well in 10 days. It was really impressive. And like the kids loved it also. And at the end, the third year, we controlled the video game with the EEG brain signal. So the EEG is a tool to measure your brain waves. And that's a bit more expensive than $10 or 50 euros. But thanks to the collaboration with Emotive, with the sponsorship from Emotive, we could get it. And so there was 2 topics. First, like how does the brain works? And second was how to design a video game, basically. So now that the specifics are done and you know a bit more about me and the background, let's see the challenge you may face during the preparation of the project. So there is all the challenges that come up front when you are thinking about your project. The first thing to know is that you want to find a project where you're comfortable with the subject. That may sound a bit stupid, say like this. The thing is, when you're a PhD working on a big lab, you have like tons of money, even if you don't realize it. You have tons of money with like very expensive material, etc. It's quite difficult to find one topic on your subject that works well for 10 days and a quite cheap budget. So, for example, I was working on the mouse auditory system with big microscopes, and it was very difficult to find mice in the summer school. It was difficult to find an expensive microscope for the summer school, so I had to find a way around. And if you need to go out of your comfort zone, you're still at a level after the PhD, I would say, or during the PhD, where you can learn about the subject quite easily by reading papers. Even if it takes like 1 week, you can read papers and get comfortable with the subject, comfortable enough to run a summer school with it. So you should feel comfortable about the subject. In that case, it was still neuroscience, but don't hesitate to go out of your little comfort zone, which is a PhD subject or postdoc subject. Another big challenge when you're preparing your project is that it should last for 10 days, not more, not less. If it lasts for more than 10 days, you'll have some frustration in the student group because they want to have a full project, not only the first part. And if it lasts for less than 10 days, then you'll also have frustration because they will get bored quite easily by the end. So it's quite difficult to know exactly how the student will behave, if they will learn fast or if they will just like don't understand some concept and you'll spend days on it. Basically, as Nina said on her presentation, the goal is really to have like several plans, plan A, plan B, plan C, in case something goes wrong. So one rule that I learned is that you should never underestimate the students, that they always learn faster than you think they could. And the second one is that if you can have like several little experiments at the end of the summer school, if they go faster than you expect, like just prepare some little project of 1 or 2 days that they can do easily after they've done the big project. And last point, I mention it often, but it's quite difficult to finance scientific projects with only a few euros. So thankfully, we can have sponsorship, and we did it like with success in the past. They also have access to computers, so everything is included. But basically, the rest of the experiment should be quite cheap. It's kind of difficult when you're in a lab with like tons of equipment to find a project and to get out of your like daily routine with all this expensive equipment. But basically, you need to just focus on what works, what doesn't. And in my case, just well, like in my case, we build the maze by ourselves instead of buying one already done. Also, we need to make some bees asleep, and for that you need like some cold. So some lab have equipment that are regulated at perfect temperature. In our case, we just put them on some frozen peas that we buy in the supermarket before. Like you need to be original here to make it fit under the 50 euros barrier. So all these challenges are quite difficult to solve, and basically it's quite rare to solve the three all together. So be ready to be flexible and to improvise a bit. Once you're in the summer school, in the summer camp, you will face different challenges. Like Nina mentioned, some students are faster to learn than others. And that's a problem because in your group, you want to have a homogeneous group of students learning together. So one way you can solve this is if you dispatch them in little group of 1 or 2, you can put one student that learns fast with one student that is a bit slower on some concepts. And then they will communicate together, they will switch, and one will be like the teacher for one topic, and then the other one will be the teacher on another topic. They can help themselves like this. It's especially true and useful when you are running some computer science projects, because some kids already know how to code, others don't. And when you have this discrepancy in the group, it's kind of difficult to handle. Another challenge in life is that you always forget something in your luggage, and there is one equipment that you needed for your project, and you don't have it, and you need to improvise. That's the most difficult one, I would say. So I talk about the frozen peas to put the bees asleep. But here there is no really golden rules. The best thing to do is to have several plans in case something goes wrong. So don't hesitate to have come to the summer school with several projects in mind in case the plan A goes wrong. You should always have a parallel path that they can take. And then the last and also difficult topic is to keep them entertained during 10 very exhausting days. So as said in the previous presentation, some days goes from 8 in the morning to 4 in the morning. So you need to be up and ready for the next day and keep them interested in your subject and entertained. So the best way I found to do that is to make them develop interest in you. So spend lots of time with them, be friendly, be a clown sometime, and just be kind of their relative, be a friend more than a tutor. And in your science project, you'll have some dominance anyway, because you know more than them on this subject. So they will respect you. So be super friendly during the social times, and then during the science project, they will respect you anyway. So just, I think it's one of my last slide, the few ideas that works in a project and that I found successful in my project, but also project of other people I witnessed during the summer school. They are teenagers, and even if they love science, they also love to go outside. And basically all my project where I was catching bees, for example, had a huge success because we went outside, we're running in the fields, and all the other projects like the Tokiwoki or the collect microbes in some ponds work super well because they want to spend some time outside, especially during summer. Another thing that works well is to keep them busy with challenges. So not all the kids apply for a summer camp, especially for science summer camp. So they want to have their brain challenged. And so a little riddle before going to sleep, just to keep them entertained during the night, kind of, is always cool. And they spend all night thinking about it. And the morning they come to you very excited and say, "Oh, I found a solution for our experiment. We should do blah, 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 blah." And it's worked kind of nicely. Same to keep them entertained and to promote their creativity, you should let them design part of the experiment. So that comes with coming with different plan A, plan B, plan C. Basically, if there is several ways to solve your question, just ask them how they will do it. And if one of them is feasible, just go for it. This way they will feel like super rewarded because the experiment was their idea. It's kind of boring for them to just follow a protocol. So just let them think about the experiments. And finally, these kids, so the kids that apply to summer camp, are usually some weirdo in their school. Like they love science. It's not always easy to love science when you're a teenager, like with people around you that really doesn't care. And so they see you with your like background, with your master or PhD or postdoc, as kind of their goal in life, which is quite surprising when you go there at first. But then you should just be open to discuss your career, sorry for the accent, and discuss the different choice you did to go there to reach the PhD level with them, because that's something that they are super interested into. And I remember talking like more than 2 hours, I think, with one of the students, because she asked me tons of things. She was fascinated about neuroscience and she wanted to know everything about like what whole my background, like what I did for my bachelor, what I did, like, and just to support my claim, like spend time with them. We spend like amazing times around the piano, for example, or just playing games together. So just if you have the chance to go there, just spend time with them during social times. It's wonderful. That's it for me. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Alexandra. And thank you both, Nicolina and you, on showing the important things when thinking about the project for high school students. Before actually moving on to the practical part of this workshop, I just wanted to also mention more personal story from my own experience of being a part of this summer school. Oh, I hope I'm sharing my screen. Okay, just a second. Yeah, okay. I don't see the screen. Anyway, doesn't matter. Okay, so hi, I'm Dunya, and first time I was a part of this summer school was in 2006, and that was a little bit by accident actually that happened, because at that time I wasn't really very interested in natural sciences, the part of this school is kind of covering. I was more like a maths nerd. And then by an accident, I won like a prize for some mathematical competition to kind of, why don't you apply for this summer school? It might be interesting. And that kind of experience made me really fall in love with science, because the first year I was working on a biology project. We were cloning bacteria with a different plasmid, so we were getting them to glow in different colors. And today I think that that's like the coolest experiment I've done in my life, although I've studied later on molecular biology, but that was really cool. And that kind of made me fall in love with science, and I kind of changed I've kind of broadened my perspective and changed what I thought would be something that interests me. And then I came back to the summer school for 2 more times, luckily, during my high school. And this is me in 2007 or 8. I was a part of a project which was a computer science project. We were building a system and an app that would enable vets in Croatia to monitor wild wolves and animals. So we had these like antennas, and the animals had the GPS tags. So we built an app that would then kind of locate where the animals are. And then this is me 10 years later, as in a role of a project leader. teaching molecular gastronomy, so completely something different. But what I wanted to say, for me, being a student really changed my life in a big time. And one of the reasons for that was that it taught me about the importance of science communication. It taught me how important presenting skills are. And as Nicolina mentioned, there are a lot of opportunities for students to present their work, and not just on these like a seminar type of like a presentation where the students jointly present what they did in a week or 10 days, but oftentimes there are situations where you have like guest lecturers who come, that just walk in, and you kind of have to give them a pitch on what the project is about. And these project leaders can be, you know, from very much in the field, and they've spent their whole life working on exactly the project you're working for the last 3 days, and you know nothing more than what you learned in the last 3 days, to people that don't know anything. And so really being adaptable to kind of practice actually adapting to presenting was something that, you know, to this day is something that I find really valuable. And then another thing is that oftentimes students, you know, the way we're taught in schools is that you kind of have to know all the answers, have to know everything by heart. But in science, we don't know most of the things, actually. We're just trying to figure it out. And so for students, you know, when you're being quizzed or asked questions about your project by people who know a lot more by you, it oftentimes feels embarrassing to say, oh, I don't know. But actually, you know, being okay with the fact that you say, oh, I don't know, I'll have a look and I'll let you know later, is also, I think, one very valuable learning point from this school. Yes, and another point that I think makes this school different from you know, learning in regular high school or other things is that most of the project leaders, as Nicolina mentioned already, are master or PhD students, meaning that they are like 5 to maybe 10 years older than the students themselves. So there's a really like a friendly atmosphere where oftentimes students feel towards their project leaders as if they're like older sibling and not someone ex cathedra who's trying to teach them something. So yeah, so I've been in the school 3 times as a student. I've ran 2 projects, and I was once a workshop leader, and then I organized the school just before the pandemic hit. So about the projects that I organized. So first year, I organized a project called Can We Help House MD? And this is a TV show about this like clinician by using genomics in medicine. So the idea for that was that students were presented with a hypothetical patient and his medical history. And the story was that the clinicians in the hospitals were not able to identify what was the disease that the patient had. But luckily we had the genomic data, so RNA-seq. And then the question was, can we, using this genomic data, actually find what is wrong with this patient? And then a few years later, I came back with a project that was very different from this first one, that was more on molecular gastronomy. So the idea of the project was more for kind of students to think in a scientific way on a, you know, like not necessarily in like running gels or doing like a very intensive laboratory projects, but rather to, you know, be able to apply the same like way of scientific thinking in a completely different environment. In this case, it was like, oh, let's learn about biochemistry of cooking and try to alter it by knowing the theory, what happens behind it. So yeah, so just a couple of thoughts on these projects. So the first project I ran was at the time when I just finished my master's. So I can't say I knew everything about bioinformatics for sure. And so at that time, I was inspired to create this project by a course that I took from Coursera. So I've created a synthetic RNA-seq data, and I've added kind of a few variants that would be causing and mutations that would cause the disease. And then I guided students to go from this raw sequencing data to aligning the data, annotating the variants, and then finding the clinical trials that these patients might be enrolled in. So first problem I had was the fact that I had 4 students in my project, and they were very different for people. One student was extremely extroverted person who out-talked all other students, but she also thought that she knows the most. But when you would start asking her questions, you knew that she only knew stuff superficially, and that there were other people who were much more introverted, who kind of never really started answering questions, that probably knew much better what was going on. So because of that, instead of everyone getting their own patient and their own data set, I decided to pair the students, just like Alexandra mentioned a little bit before, so that they jointly work together to try to figure out how to get the data, how to align the data, and so on. And then along the course of the project, I kind of realized how actually complex this is, just because of the vastness of the theoretical knowledge they would need to fully understand the project, because it's not just about learning a pipeline of how to align the data sets and stuff, but you also have to have this idea of, like in biology, what are the mutations, what differences they can cause, and so on. So for me, I spent quite a lot of time during the course of the project itself to kind of try to make new learning materials for them to be better understanding of, like, okay, why is a deletion different from just a single position change in a genome, and so on. But in the end, I think students were really excited about this project. They kind of loved this idea that you could, going from the raw sequencing, just the information on the nucleotides, to go into this idea of, like, oh, there's a clinical trial, there's a drug, and so on. And then when I came a few years later to work on the science of deliciousness, what we call the molecular gastronomy project, and there my kind of motivation to do this project was the fact that I thought that the most useful skill that the students can learn from this summer school in this such a short time frame was this idea of, like, how to think scientifically, or how to define a hypothesis. What do you need to do in order to prove that your hypothesis is either correct or wrong, and so on. And so that's why we came up with this project, and I co-led this project with a friend of mine who was at the time a PhD student in biotechnology. And initially in this project, we kind of taught the students on the biochemical methods and biophysical methods in the cooking. So for example, like the protein structures, like the change transition between the different states, or what happens when you cook, and so on. And then we kind of asked for each student to define a hypothesis they wanted to test, and then kind of try to plan an experiment to prove whether their hypotheses were correct or not. So one of the students, for example, tried to do, like, the creamiest risotto you can get by knowing, like, how starches are released in the rice and so on. Can he modify the conditions in which the risotto is cooked? Or, like, here there's one student who was trying to get, like, a perfect lava cake, and so on. So yeah, because we kind of wanted to have this, like, very open idea of the project for, like, give students an opportunity to pitch their own projects. We had to be very flexible and kind of think on the very last moment and figure out, okay, yes, they would need this set of equipment, do it very last moment. So that is me, and I think now it's your turn, actually. So we've planned actually to have kind of this, like, more practical part of the workshop, where we asked you to use the 30 minutes, next 30 minutes, to kind of try to come up with a plan. What would you try and work with students for a week in this scientific project? Aimed at the high school students that are really interested in science. So we were thinking actually of splitting you all into groups, or smaller groups, just to kind of make the creating idea for the project more easy, just based on your backgrounds. And then some things to kind of think about are definitely the points that Alexandra raised in his previous presentation, but yes, think about feasibility of the project. Is it possible even to do it in a week or in 10 days? what background knowledge would students need? Oftentimes, the problem kind of is that the first 2 days are used just to teach students theory, which can be quite boring. So, maybe it's better to spend a little bit of theory. Of course, you need a theory at the beginning, but, try to have some practical work and so on. And then, yes, so as it was mentioned, try to plan for a backup activities. What if some equipment broke down? Can we substitute it by something else? Or is there additional things that the students who are very advanced could work on and so on? And then after these 30 minutes, we could meet together and you can pitch your ideas. We can discuss them if you want. If not, that's also perfectly fine. So yes, so that's me. I'll stop sharing.
Thank you very much to all of you. Big applause from our side. I realized that it might not make sense for us to move to another room because I'm not sure if it makes sense to create breakout session. But I thought if we can address any questions, if anyone has any comments or sharing experiences and so on, and we can also record that part, and then we can stop, and then we can go to the practical side, the way you, Dunya, explained. Because I still think doing something practical will be much help, especially those that join us today. So feel free to write your question in the comment, where you can. I think you should be able also to speak. If not, I definitely can give you the right to do that. All right. Anyone willing to?
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for this presentation. And I have questions for Nicolina regarding the funding. How it's really difficult to get funding from some government organisms or pharmaceutical companies. It's really difficult to get funding for this kind of summer schools.
I think it really depends on where you're located. So Croatia only entered the European Union in 2013. So that kind of opened doors to more funding opportunities. But especially before that, it was really very difficult because, in less developed countries, the governments are not investing as much into things like science. So we've had limited success in that, and we were never able to really fully cover all the expenses you would need for a school. When it comes to equipment, like for instance, the EEG headset that Alex mentioned from Emotive, or the nanopore sequencing device. So these kind of big companies are really quite ready to just donate your equipment as long as you ask them. So that went much easier than we actually expected when we tried to do it. And we also had some funding from also the big pharma companies, for instance, for a few years. But you collect bits and pieces from different sides. But in the end, ideally, we would keep the school free for all the participants. And if someone really cannot afford this small fee that we ask, we also offer scholarships for those students. But so far we have never been able to collect enough resources to really cover the entire cost of the school.
Thank you.
Maybe I can share also my experience here, because I was part of a PhD that was funded through Marie Curie alumni training, ITN type of project. And I was able my flights to be reimbursed. So I was able somehow also to be financed my participation at the summer school. So in case if you are a postdoc or a PhD, I believe you can try to ask your supervisor where to allocate initially. For example, if you're a postdoc, you definitely should have some budget for training for science communication. And if you consider participating at such summer schools, I definitely encourage you to take the advantage of that.
Yeah, and oftentimes the supervisor is also willing to see this event, so your participation in it as something, as a conference, for instance. So oftentimes people aren't really required to take the days off, which is nice. And from the financial side, so we do cover all the costs to our volunteers, because it wouldn't be fair to us to pay, right? But if someone like Nicoletta has access to extra resources from her PhD, that definitely always helps. so she can cover part of her own costs. I think Alex had the same thing when he was doing his PhD, so he also covered part of his costs.
Yep, exact. And then you're so in love with the summer school that you use your own money to take your flight and stuff, because you really want to be part of it, and you really respect the fact that they don't make money out of it. It's just like all the money is invested in the kids, and that's just wonderful compared to other organizations that tend to like organize summer schools that are super expensive. And so just to support the idea, once you reach the postdoc level and you have more funding for your personal life, I mean, and personally, I decided to take the flight of my income.
I see that we also have a question from Fernanda in the chat. So she asks whether we follow up the participants, or do we do any further activities to keep them motivated? So we do have typically once per year the reunion. So we kind of make this nice environment where everyone can come together once again and kind of discuss where they are in the life. And actually, Dunya here, she and another person in the organization, they started an alumni database. So we basically once per year send a questionnaire to everyone that ever participated in the school to kind of check in with them. So where they are, how they're doing. And it's really nice to see that really a lot of them pursue science careers afterwards. Also, because the entire project is volunteer-based, we kind of rely on finding people who are really passionate about science and passionate about things like this. And oftentimes we find those in the pool of people who were participants in the school. For instance, Mario and Dunya, they were both participants, and they kind of came back to give back, to provide to the next generations the experience they had. So I think that's one of our strongest ways of keeping them, involved into more activities, because there are many roles you can do at the school. So you can guide an entire 10-day project, but we also have a specific day when we have smaller workshops. So the teenagers, they can switch fields for a day and see if maybe they would also like to do something else. So you can also come and run this kind of a smaller part of the school.
And if I may add to this answer, I think it's also very personal. Like every interaction between it. Oftentimes, I think the interaction is between the students and their project leaders because they spend so much time together, and and different students kind of have a different need for the future follow up and stuff. But I do know, and I've also provided, at least in a number of cases, the students that ask, for example, a reference letter when they're applying to colleges in the US. And for me, it was also kind of impressive that, they would rather ask me, which they know me for like a week, than their own professors that they studied for 4 years together. So there are students, or for example, there are a few students who were coming to the institute of a project leader to kind of meet and see actually the full scale of the project in the proper lab with the proper microscopes and things like this. So yes, I think it's also on top of this alumni base that Nicolina mentioned. There's other interaction that goes, but I think it also goes both ways. Like if the students want to have this interaction.
Yeah. Now you also reminded me when speaking, Dunya, that we had this idea of a buddy program, which we're planning to launch sometime soon. So the idea would be that the younger students are connected with an older students like ourselves, so not super old, but a bit older, who are now experienced in doing a PhD or a postdoc. And so they can ask us practical questions like, how do I choose the university? Or how do I find a PhD? Or I don't know, how do I write a science paper? Or prepare my CV when I'm searching for a job. So that's something that I think would be quite nice to kind of link people together from different generations so that we can also in that way help each other.
Otherwise, about this follow-up, I think all of us are still in touch with initial students, or the students that we had in our group. And it's always interesting to see how their evolution and also what career path they chose. And the initial topic that you discussed during that summer school, it's still interested to them. And at least in my case, we keep in touch to know any updates, what's happening in that domain. And it's different, I think, to so many other schools, mainly because of this community and the interaction and the level of the communication you have. But for me, it was very unique.
So maybe before I forget, I invite you people in the audience, if you think that this would be something that would interest you to guide such a project, feel free to get in touch with us. I think Nicoletta and the MC Alumni Association will provide some kind of contact so you can reach us or just find us on LinkedIn. And we would gladly talk to you about the potential project next year.
I think I'll stop for now the recording part. I'll just thank you again for your time and for agreeing to come to speak to us. I'm sure that even though we didn't have so many participants, I'm quite confident that the video will be checked afterwards.